Welcome to the overview of the 10 building blocks of Chinuch. These building blocks, essentially, I call them 10 building blocks of Chinuch. They essentially cover all the areas that we need as mechanchim, teachers, educators, to cover for our children. It's not the actual curriculum per se, it's more like a framework. 7 is living Tefila. Living Tefila has to do with how do we make davening relevant to our children? How do we make davening exciting for children? Now, that doesn't mean to say that it isn't exciting and it's not relevant, but it does mean to say that we do have a serious challenge. In our educational system today, for the most part, and just tell me if you think this is accurate, our children don't have a very strong relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu through Tefillah. And for many kids, it's actually not only not strong, it gets weaker and weaker the more they daven. The explanation for this, unfortunately, is not that mysterious. It really is based on the simple problem that if I don't know what I'm saying, if I don't understand the words coming out of my mouth, then what am I actually doing for 30 minutes of Shacharis, morning prayers? Or if we add on, as I get a little bit older, it's really 45 minutes, then it's an hour plus Mincha Mariv. You got a good hour and a quarter a day, and that's being conservative. An hour and a quarter a day, I'm saying words that I don't understand. So what am I actually doing? Am I connecting to Kadosh Baruch Hu? Or am I disconnecting? And this is a serious problem. Because what's ending up happening is that we have many children who've fallen off the map, and Baruch Hashem, many who've come back. And when they do, they will often identify what were some of the components that were part of the system, not with intent to push me out, but by default pushed me out. And one of the top 3 out of 17 that many kids have identified is Tefillah, prayer. And the simple reason is, and there's no mystery here, is that if I'm saying words that I don't really understand, and I'm doing this for over an hour a day, for over a decade, eventually a healthy mind is going to disconnect and say, this is not only not relevant, this is meaningless. And what I'm actually doing is a exercise in meaninglessness. That's frightening. And so there are kids who are doing this as robots, and then you have some kids who are married with kids themselves, waking up in their mid-20s, early 30s, saying the same question. What am I doing this for? Why am I from? Why should I continue doing this? So I don't want to get onto the negative of this, and this is not Has V'Shalom a kitrug. It's not meant to be, there's no intent here to be blasting or knocking ourselves. That's not, no one will ever get anywhere that way. This is completely focused on, what can we do to make Tefillah more exciting, interesting, in a way that's real and not artificial. So, first of all, what we do in this particular building block is that we spend a good couple of hours going into the meaning of Tefillah, just the word, and the intent, and the history of davening. Because when we look at the history of prayer, we discover that the word Tefillah does not mean prayer. It's not a bad translation, it's just not accurate. It's a Christian-based translation, and it is problematic. The word Palel means judge. Palilim are judges. Lihit Palel means reflexive, means I'm judging myself, which becomes, well, who's the worst person to judge me, if not me? Oh, so Lihit Palel Hashem really means I'm judging myself in Hashem's presence. And we get into the history of who was the first person to pray and why did he pray, and that was Adam Rishon. And we look at the history of Tefillah through Chumash and then Nach. And then we understand why Chazal saw it Beruach Kodsham in their Ruach HaKodesh, this divine inspiration, that if they were not to make an apparent change in the way we daven from spontaneous communication and conversation with the Kadosh Baruch Hu to a text which becomes the formula for me to say someone else's words. If we were not going to make that switch, we would lose the discipline altogether of a direct, spontaneous relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu through spontaneous conversation. Speaking to him any time of the day. It doesn't have to be Shacharis, Mincha, Marv, any time, anywhere. Very few exceptions. So it comes out that we have to look at the history to reclaim our understanding of the original intent. And with that, then we ask ourselves, okay, so how does this translate for teaching children? We go through a number of different pieces. I would call them steps. The very same steps as we go through for Lashon HaTorah, the language acquisition, which was building block number 1. We need reading accuracy. If a child doesn't read accurately and later fluently, why will that sabotage their ability to have a successful career in prayer? The obvious answer is, well, I'm practicing saying the wrong words. And if I'm practicing wrong words, obviously I can't reconstruct it, so I don't know what I'm saying. And that becomes a problem right there. So the building blocks for Lashon HaTorah, Lashon HaKodesh, the language acquisition, become the initial building blocks for the Siddur as well, for davening. We also follow Chazal in the sense that we follow halacha, which means, and please, I don't mean this as la'afuke anybody or anyone, but in the words of Reb Shlomo Valba of blessed memory, in his Sefer Zriu Binyan Bechinuch, was very scathing, very, very strong in claiming that the blame we have today for children turning away from Torah because of Tefila, the way it's taught in the earlier years, is really on us, the adults. Why? Because we're pushing our children to say much more davening way too early. A child has to know Shemona Esrei by 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy. They do not need to be saying all of davening by the age of 7, 8, or 9, or even 10. And because we've got a race on us and the pressure that we've created with that race, what we've done is turned it into an artificial pressure, which we then mistakenly call a Masorah, that this is how to teach kids Tefillah, without realizing, Einav B'Roshai, that if I'm going to be smart about this, what I'm actually choosing to do is by having kids saying much more than they understand, way earlier than they need to be, because of the rush to make them know so much and daven so much way too early. The major sacrifice of that is Havana, is understanding. And all the time that we would have otherwise had to teach our children, not Biot Tefillah, that's way later on, but the intent behind Tefillah. And that's not a shiur, it's not a lecture, it's simply how to take the main messages of every chelik of davening and say it in English with the words. But not to have the words of davening until we understand what we're saying, or at least that it's going on simultaneously. So I'm just speaking in theory right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to show how we can make Tefillah alive. It's living right now in the minds and the mouths of our children as they say Pokeach Ivrim, and they learn all about the eyes. Well, not all, but they're going to learn about the eyes. We'll have fantastic video clips which are based on every part of the major parts of the human anatomy, where you have Rabbi Pesach Krohn interviewing a frum doctor who's a specialist in that particular part of the anatomy, and open up the eyes, forgive the pun, of the children to understand what's going on in the bracha Pokeach Ivrim. How many millions of color shades the eye is able to interpret on its retina and the brain is able to distinguish. The eye is so perfectly complex that even Darwin, in his shall we call it theory of evolution, himself was very perturbed by the fact that the eye threw him off. There's no way he could explain that the eye somehow came about by some sort of spontaneous process of elimination over hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of years, and he admitted to that effect. And that, of course, itself should be, by his own admission, the reason why evolution should have lost its popularity right there. But that aside, when a child is learning Zoikef Kifufim, and he's not just saying the bracha, but we're saying, Hashem, thank you for my spine. And we've spent half an hour, or a week learning about the spine. starting about the Nifloas Abeira, the wonders of our Creator, in how the nervous system through the spine and all the bones because of the spine and all the structure and persona of the person that is carried by his body language is all coming from his spine, his whole entire mobility. And what we're saying thank you for when we say these brachas, Malbish Arumim, thank you for my clothes, we're thanking Hashem for wool, for sheep, for grass. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for, thank you for Sha'asali Kol Sarki, thank you for all my needs, in reference specifically, say Chazal, to my shoes, leather shoes. Thank you for cows. Thank you for their hide, for the leather. We're being grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on so many levels, and what comes out is that when we're saying a bracha with a very quick one-liner, thank you Hashem for my shoes, thank you for my clothes. I love you because of my spine and my spinal cord. My nervous system, thank you for all my bones. When we say a simple thank you, a simple praise, which is the intent behind the bracha, as Rambam says in Hilchos Brachas Perek Aleph, Harbe brachas tiknu hachmeinu zal, our sages legislated many blessings. The Torah only mandates one. Chazal legislated many. Kedei lahaskir et abayret hamid, in order to remember Kadosh Baruch Hu constantly. So the whole concept here is to help the children live the bracha, live the part of that tefillah. And we can do this in pre-1A and in first grade. And all the time that as we add on a grade, instead of doing more davening, do much less, and in all the freed up time, we're going to spend that time learning about each chelik of tefillah. And once we've learned a lot, be'iyun, of that, not in the words per se, but in the concept of what that particular message is communicating to us, what ends up happening is the children, instead of having more and more rote learning and adding on more of that, we only add on what they've already learned a lot about and appreciate the praise and the gratitude that comes out of that bracha before we get into Bir Tefillah. We're not talking about Bir Tefillah. We're talking about the essential message of each component of davening, and then add that davening onto the rote davening of each morning. So what ends up happening is that each year we add on only a few minutes, max, 2 or 3, 4 minutes, max. So that the Yetzer Hara, so to speak, is being cheated because the amount of time davening takes is so short each year, it's only a little bit more, that the Yetzer Hara hasn't got time to even argue that this is too long. And because there's an appreciation and we're saying what the words actually mean, what ends up happening is that it becomes alive, it's living tefillah.